Hello and welcome back to the ILTV Podcast. I'm Maayan Hoffman, Executive Editor of ILTV, and we're so happy to welcome back our viewers and our listeners. I have with me today a very interesting guest all the way from the United States. We have Gabe Groisman, who works in government affairs and is the former mayor of Bal Harbour in Florida. He also hosts the Standpoint Podcast. Welcome, Gabe.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. So, we have such an exciting time here in Israel. We're getting our hostages back. And, after nearly 2 years or really more than 2 years of suffering from this war. And, there seems to be a lot of shifting alliances also going on in the region. Do you think that Israel and the world are really ready to enter this new era in the Middle East?
Well, first of all, we're entering it whether we're ready or not. There's definitely a new era in the Middle East. If you look at this war as it winds down, it's definitely not going to be the end of the war, but at least it's winding down. We're entering into a phase where suddenly Hamas isn't the threat that it was 2 years ago. Hezbollah is not the threat it was 2 years ago. Iran's not the threat it was 2 years ago. Of course, also on the negative side of the balance sheet, let's say, the relationships that Israel has with Europe and other countries in the Western world have really faltered as a result of the long war. We can talk about that as much as you want. But then also the access of Turkey, Iran, Qatar, that's really been it's really thrown a wrench in the balance of what those powers are and what they're going to be. And it's a difficult conversation to have. It turns out that all the pieces around Israel are complicated pieces. So if we need to move the pieces around to create peace in the region or quiet in the region or stability in the region, it means we have to play with those pieces of these foreign powers that are not clean, right? They're all parts of the Muslim Brotherhood. They have different ideologies, etc. But we kind of have to play with those because those are the pieces that are on the board. Are we ready for it? I don't know. I don't know if Israel's ready for it or the West is ready for it. But it's definitely a better chapter than the last. And I am incredibly optimistic that the state of Israel now is going to see the next several decades of the most stability, strength, and growth that they have since 1948.
Wow, that's an incredible sentiment to share, an incredible vision if that can actually come to fruition. Now, you've said that both Trump and Netanyahu really deserve credit for the fact that we got these hostages back home. What does real political courage look like then in times like this? And why are you concerned about whether or not the prime minister is getting that credit, which you seem to be very vocal about when others have really said, let's just give it all to Trump?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely insane that anyone could say that the prime minister doesn't deserve credit for the hostage deal that he created here with President Trump and that he reached with President Trump. If you have any understanding of the alliance between the United States and Israel, any understanding of the alliance between President Trump and Netanyahu, and that is how Trump looks at things. He looks at things as personal relationships. They were sitting on the same side of the table working on this deal. Israel was pushing for the parameters that they wanted, and they got. On top of that, Prime Minister Netanyahu, for whatever people, the ones who are against him, and by the way, the voices that we hear are the vocal minority, despite the fact that it's 100,000, 150,000, and still by numbers a minority in this country, in the state of Israel. Also, by the way, in the United States, those voices are pushing for that they're now saying that it's only Trump, and he forced Netanyahu to enter into this deal. That's a fantasy. It's not a reality. And what does that really mean? Why does it matter? You're saying, well, because reality matters, right? History is being written right now, right? Mm-hmm. Prime Minister Netanyahu had pressure from inside, from his own coalition, from the street here in Israel, from the President of the United States before the election, Joe Biden, from every European leader, from every Middle Eastern leader to stop the war, to stop with the hopes that Hamas would suddenly decide that if they pulled out, they would return the hostages. But of course, everyone forgets the Hadar Golden problem, what I call a Hadar Golden problem. We left 11 years ago from Gaza, and they're still holding his body. God willing, they'll return it in this exchange, right? And it was only because Netanyahu continued to push forward despite all of that pressure. And now we're here. And yesterday, and I'm not sure when this will air, but last night from this discussion we're having at least, Steve Witkoff was speaking in Hostage Square, and when he thanked Prime Minister Netanyahu, the crowds booed. And really, I thought it was very telling. It was very telling that many of the voices there are not just there for the hostages, but they're also there the same reason they were there before October 7th, which is to be against the prime minister.
Yeah, I saw many people posting on social media actually about that, how they were saying, there were 400,000 people at the event on Saturday night where Witkoff and Kushner spoke, and that many of those 400,000 people were exactly that, the judicial reform crowd, people who are anti-government, and that when the hostages came home, that the rallies wouldn't stop, but in fact they would continue to be very vocal because it's not the hostages necessarily that they wanted home, but rather the overthrow of the current government. government. I mean, we are a democratic country. We will go to elections actually quite soon. And, whether Netanyahu will run or not run is still up in the air. But certainly it will be a democratic election like we've always had. We've always elected our officials here in this country. So, we're nearing the end of the war. And we really do need to take a lot of lessons. I mean, some political, diplomatic, as you started to mention, with regards to our relationships around the world, and also security lessons. When you look back at the last 2 years of war, are there things that you see as somebody who's been analyzing and watching the war for the last couple of years, from the inside and outside, let's call it, that you feel that Israel really needs to learn?
Yeah, I think we should learn from Israel needs to learn from its mistakes. Like, we have to be honest. On October 8th, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu said nothing can ever go back to what things were like before October 7th, but we're seeing so many things go back to the same place. First of all, within Israeli society, within the Jewish world and the diaspora. But if we're talking about just politically or from a security standpoint, the policy of containment within Gaza was a failure. Right? That was the policy of the state of Israel. Let's contain them there. Let money flow through there. They're just going to bark just like they do in Egypt and in Jordan and in other places, but they're not actually going to attack us. That's a policy of containment. That failed. That's going to fail again in Gaza if we go back to that, if the state of Israel goes back to that, and it'll fail in Judea and Samaria if the state of Israel goes back to that. And that's the biggest lesson. And we're seeing, people even in Israel don't understand that Hamas is not just in Gaza. Right? Hamas is in Hebron, Hamas is in Ramallah, Hamas is all over Judea and Samaria or the West Bank, whichever term people want to use. They're there. They're right at your doorstep, which means Israel needs to take an active stance and ignore the noise from around the world. And without security, you have nothing. And I think that's what the state of Israel needs to understand.
And I think it's also, though, how you define security. But it is interesting what you said, because when we look at polls that are done by Palestinians of Palestinians, which I think are the most accurate polls, rather than looking at, let's say, an Israeli poll of the Palestinians, we actually find that the majority of people living in the West Bank would prefer to have Hamas as their government. So it's not just that Hamas is in Judea and Samaria, it's that Hamas is supported and active in Judea and Samaria, that the people want Hamas to be in charge, which is a very scary thought when you think about how close many of these places that you just named are actually to Israel's border. I mean, Gaza also, of course, was very close to certain communities, but we're talking close to Tel Aviv and close to Jerusalem and areas where there are huge populations in Israel.
I think, just to interject for a second, I think the Israeli public is coming to terms with the fact of the necessity of having Jewish life in Judea and Samaria. Yeah. If there are no Jewish settlements around those areas, we're not going to have security for the rest of the state of Israel. And if you don't believe me, just go to Psagot, not the winery, to go to the Yeshuv, Psagot, and stand on the rooftop like I did many times in this last year, and you could see Hamas marching right there. It's a 15-minute drive from Hebrew University. It's right there. Right? If they're not there, the army's not there. If they're not there, they're going to continue to grow towards, and it makes it impossible to secure. And by the way, Jerusalem isn't the most difficult to defend. It's actually Tel Aviv and the coast, the Gush Dan region, is much more difficult to defend without that. So if you look at the communities in the Shomron, from Ariel all the way down to the coast, those are critical for the security of the coast of the state of Israel. And I think that's a shift that has happened in politics. I was talking to Amichai Chikli last week on my podcast, and he was going through some of the numbers that other than the far, far left in the state of Israel, the majority of the state of Israel now understands the need for there to be a Jewish presence there, whether it's a state or not. That's a different discussion, but the requirement that we need to have a Jewish presence in Judea and Samaria, it's critical for the security of the state of Israel.
Yeah, I think the polls are showing that. And of course, we saw, because the disengagement in 2005 is what we know led to October 7th, 2023. 18 years later, had we been there, of course, there was a lot of loss of life. I mean, I remember living here during that time, and the number of soldiers that were killed on the roads, Chigash Katif, was extensive. It was not a quiet period for the people living in that area. At the other hand, if you didn't have the security, if you had kept security there and not ignored, quote unquote, what was going on in Gaza, you never would have gotten to an October 7th.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, without question. Now, I want to turn to the U.S. for a moment, because obviously you do live there, and go back to Qatar's role in shaping all of this. Israel attacked in September Hamas inside Qatar in Doha, targeting some of the leaders. It wasn't entirely successful, as we know, in the sense that the people that we were targeting were not necessarily killed. On the other hand, it did send a strong statement. We have known that Jonathan Shanzer, I saw recently from the FDD, was briefing members of Senate and Congress about what the role that Qatar is playing in the United States, both in terms of, the security risk, the brainwashing, the kind of hate that it's bringing into the United States. Why are we allowing Qatar to sit around the table? It seems like so disconnected.
So the United States is full of Qatar apologists. everywhere you look.
Why?
I'm not one of them.
Okay.
You have to look at them with clear eyes. You can say they still had a role or have a role to play when it comes to for it to be a tool that the United States uses for negotiations with terror groups. We used Qatar for the Taliban. That's when that relationship was set up, as far as I understand. I also spoke to Jonathan on my podcast about this and other issues a few months ago. He's one of the top experts on this. By the way, Senator Rick Scott is the one from Florida who hosted that group. He's also not a Qatar apologist. But it's really complicated and it's upsetting because it was announced this week, along with this plan, that the United States is going to open some sort of Qatar Air Force facility in Utah in the United States, which is
crazy.
Qatar is the Muslim Brotherhood. Qatar Al Jazeera is controlled by them. They host terrorists. They host Hamas. They've funded Hamas for many years. They have all the answers to any question you ask. I've had conversations with them before, of course. Well, the United States asks us, there's all these answers. At the end of the day, they play both sides. And the United States and Israel and the West, in my opinion, just like with Turkey, needs to say, you're either here or you're there. You're either with us or you're against us. You can't have one foot on each side of the fence. Unfortunately, it's not the case. And when you dig a little bit, if you look at the hearings on the brainwashing at universities around the United States, Qatar is one of the top 3 funders of U.S. universities.
It's Qatar, it's Iran, who else?
It's Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and China.
And China, wow.
So the influence that they have, they don't just give money. So they'll say, well, Jewish donors give money. First of all, it's orders of magnitude less. Second of all, Jewish donors give money to put their name on a building. When foreign governments give money, whether they do it directly or through other entities, what they do is they sponsor chairs. And when they sponsor chairs, they put what they're teaching, the syllabus that they're teaching. They started at Middle East Studies departments, but they've expanded because it wasn't so hard to take over Middle East Studies department. So you talk to college students today in the United States, and when they go to an English class, they'll be asked, please describe the apartheid in the state of Israel, right? Like, there will do their brainwashing in other courses and other coursework. It must be stopped. Unfortunately, that's somewhere where there's a lot of work to be done because things are actually going in the wrong direction.
And, it's influence, I think, not just in college campuses, but even outside. I mean, you look at what's happening even in the U.S. government. I mean, I remember the day, I'm sure you do, when Israel was like a bipartisan issue. We all, the Democrats, the Republicans, equally supported the state of Israel. And today you have things like Stop the Bombs Act, that had gone through, started getting pushed. And these this other legislation and the rhetoric that's coming out of our legislators in the United States. Do you think that we've lost the ability to have Israel be a bipartisan issue? Can we get it back? And why is this happening? Yeah,
so it's a tough discussion to have, but I think we have to be honest about it. Right, first of all, I'd like to say, even though, in fact, I'm a Republican, I work in Republican politics, from an American Jewish perspective, I wish this were a non-issue, right? Yeah. Everybody supports Israel. I'm a Republican because I'm more conservative on other issues. I want strong military, lower taxes, less government, those kind of things. But now it turns out that's not the case. The Democratic Party as a whole, there are exceptions, of course, but as a whole today is not supportive of Israel. And it's going in that direction. That is the tide of the Democratic Party. You could look at almost any election around the country, not just the New York mayor's race, where you'll see people with similar points of view being pushed and very well funded, actually challenging moderate Democrats from the left. And we're seeing it in Congress. We're seeing it in the Senate. We're seeing it in local government. We're seeing it in state government. It's everywhere, and that's where the party's going to. If you look at the DNC and the discussions they're having at the Democratic National Committee, those are the discussions they're having. They would make anyone that is a proud Jew and proud and connected and supportive of the state of Israel uncomfortable. The Republican Party today, as it sits, is incredibly supportive of Israel. That's where the Republican Party is as a party. That's where the vast majority of House congressmen are. There's maybe 3 or 4 that are not, which is very discomforting, and I'm working very hard on that issue, so I'm not dismissive of that at all. The Senate right now, the entire Senate is very supportive of Israel as well, but there's a lot of work to be done on the right as well. The voices on the outside that people are familiar with, the Tucker Carlsons of the world, are starting to have an impact on the discussion, but that's how things start, so there's a lot of concerns of where that's going to go.
Yeah, I mean, and if the Republican Party would follow suit with the Democratic Party, we'd be in real trouble in terms of U.S. support of Israel. I mean, why do Jews then keep voting so largely Democratic?
It's a great question. I spent the whole summer writing a book on this issue, which I have not finished. But really, you have to first zoom out and understand the Jewish community in the United States. Okay. You have, by most Pew Research polls, 40 to 50% of Jews that don't care at all about being Jewish. There's no connection to their Jewish culture at all, Jewish religion at all, right? We're an ethno-religion. We're an ethnicity and a religion. They're not connected in the least. At most, they eat bagels and cream cheese, and they think that's part of being Jewish. the cultural Judaism, what they'll call cultural
Right.
Judaism today, or the as a Jew, Jews. There's lots of all these terms, right? Those people, most of them are not voting Republican. They don't care about the issue. So now you're already working with one hand tied behind your back, and you think, okay, what is the delta? What do the remaining Jews think? Historically, the Democrats were more supportive of Jews and of the state of Israel. So it's very hard to disassociate from that. Republicans historically were not.
Right.
Right, but tides have changed, and it's important to for when I speak to Jewish groups, I'm okay. You got to vote with your eyes open. Vote for your own survival, for your own security here in the United States, because it's the same. When a candidate or an elected official is anti-Israel, he's also not protecting the Jewish community
100%.
in the United States, in their district. Go one by one every example, and the opposite is true. Those who are pro-Israel, supportive of Israel, will provide the security that your community needs. Give you support for your Jewish day schools, all the things that we look for in our elected officials as a Jewish community in the United States. They're there for you. So vote for your own self-interest on the Republican side. If in your heart you're a Democrat, good, get to work and start defeating all these far leftists. Try to drive your party back to the center. It's not where it's going, but get to work and do it. But we have to be honest about it.
Yeah, I mean, and it's fascinating when you start to see that shift about, you mentioned security. It's very interesting in the United States, all the anti-Semitism that is rising and the fact that people are not really noticing it. I mean, they notice it number-wise. They talk about it, but they're not really doing anything in the Jewish community. I feel like in a big picture to take action. You've got more Trump and Leotera on the people that are working on the upper level. But the people themselves, it seems that they're, we're all comfortable in the United States. Everything is fine. I mean, my own family is there. And I feel
Where do
like
they live?
Kansas.
Okay.
So maybe
They're
safer.
in Overland Park, probably.
Yeah.
Right?
How do you know Overland Park?
That's where the Jews live in Kansas.
Yeah, okay.
I travel around the country a lot, right?
Okay.
Okay, but if you're when you think of Overland Park, it reminds me of Theodor Herzl.
Yeah.
Okay? Theodor Herzl said in one of his early essays, he called it the Jewish problem. Let's say anti-Semitism. Okay?
Right.
The issue with anti-Semitism is that wherever Jews live in perceptible numbers, I'm paraphrasing Herzl right now. Wherever Jews live in perceptible numbers, anti-Semitism arrives. Right?
So in places like Kansas,
Places
where there
like
aren't
Kansas,
many Jews.
it's not a lot of Jews. It's quiet. There
Right.
are good relationships with the churches there, with the community. It's fine. The problem is, as Herzl explained, is that then when anti-Semitism rises in other places, people move to the places where there are smaller communities and they haven't reached that tipping point. Malcolm Gladwell will call it the tipping point, right? So when you reach that tipping point, then you have anti-Semitism. If you go to South Florida, there's now about 500,000 Jews in South Florida. And it's still the best place in the United States, I think the best place outside of the state of Israel for proud religious Jews to live in, period.
Do you think it'll stay?
I hope so. We work really hard on it. So talking about how hard we work on it. We're working with local law enforcement, with state law enforcement, with the federal government, with local government, city officials, county officials, state officials on every issue that arises. Not just me. There's a lot of us that work on it, and it takes a lot. In New York, it's the same thing. They're in a much worse position in New York than we are in the United States. There's 1.2 million Jews in Manhattan and the anti-Semitism there is unbearable. It's the same in downtown Chicago. Jews don't live there anymore, right? And the people are trying to move out more to the suburbs because living in New York, in Chicago, it's also an overall safety thing, but they have the issue. The same in Los Angeles, which is, if I'm not mistaken, the second biggest Jewish community in the country. Tons of anti-Semitism. So what are they doing? They're congregating. They're going to Beverly Hills, for example, which people think, all right, it's right down the street, right? But what's the difference? Beverly Hills is a lot of Persians, right? A lot of Israelis. If you look at the makeup of just the local government, the mayor now is Nazarian, is a Persian woman from the Nazarian family. All of them, John Mersch is the vice mayor. All these guys are, very pro-Israel, very strong, proud Jews. But you go down the street to L.A. or you zoom out to L.A. County, and it's misery. It's miserable for Jews there, and they are working on it. And the hard part is, it's very easy to be overwhelmed by the breadth of the problem, right? So.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
That's it. No, so people, when you think about what are they doing, many people don't know what they can do. So that's really the problem that people are seeing now.
Do you think Jews believe that it's going to continue to be safe in the United States for them?
No, I think most Jews in the United States are very afraid of where the direction things are going. What does that mean? No, that does not mean there's concentration camps coming, God forbid, right? But it does mean that the last, I'm 44 years old right now, right? The last 40 plus years of life in America, that was the honeymoon period, right? It was, everything was incredible. We never even thought of anti-Semitism. We didn't have security guards anywhere, right? We had nothing. But if you come to my kids' school today, any of them, I have 5 kids, they go to 3 different schools. Each one looks like a military base, right? That's how you have to get into the school, with guys with M16s and bulletproof vests. And we have FBI, and we have FBI liaisons, and we're working on it. And by the way, It's worse in Canada. It's worse in France. It's worse in Belgium. It's worse in Australia, right? So it's a problem that is worldwide right now.
Yeah, and the only place to go, it seems like, is Israel. I mean, and it is interesting because, you've called anti-Semitism the canary in the coal mine because you say that it starts with anti-Semitism, but it obviously leads to more issues in a society. I think we're already seeing that in the United States. I mean, maybe talk about that a little bit and how you think this is actually impacting life for all Americans and not just Jews.
Let's zoom into someone that we have to talk about, Zoran Mamdani, who I mentioned before, right? He's obviously anti-Israel, rabidly so. Is he anti-Semitic? I'm going to go out on a limb and say yes. I've never met the man, but if you just read his writings and see what he said and watch what he says or listen to what he says, that's what it smells like and sounds like, right? What else is he? He's anti-capitalist. He's anti-police. He's a quote democratic socialist. Most people have never gone online to even read the democratic socialist. I don't know if they call it a constitution. I forgot their forming document that they have. They're just straight up socialists. They say they should be elected democratically. That's the only difference, right? And that is exactly the antithesis of what America is. America was built on capitalism and equal opportunity, not equal outcomes, equal opportunities. Everyone should have a seat at the table. Everyone should have an opportunity to work hard, get their kids a good education, get a job, buy a house, raise a family, retire, right? That's the American dream. Socialism is the antithesis of that, right? And that's sort of what we're seeing everywhere. We're seeing it in Chicago with the mayor of Chicago. We're seeing it all over the country where you see anti-Israel rhetoric, where you see anti-Israel policies, where you'll see anti-Semitic policies or anti-Semitic statements. And then what comes right after that? They're anti-American, anti-capitalism, anti-everything that is America, which is the backbone of Western society.
Do you think that we're going to see the downfall of America if this continues?
No, I'm listen, you may get this from me from my statement earlier. I'm always an optimist.
Okay.
I think good ideas win. I think the communities change and people will morph into what they need to, right? So the Jewish community in particular is getting stronger. I think there's a response. I'll give you an example. We were talking about Mamdani. He's going to win the election is my prediction, not just mine. Go online and bet. You won't even win a lot of money if he wins, okay? Because he's the likely candidate. But as a result, what's going to happen? Elise Stefanik will likely win as governor. We will have a Republican governor for the first time in a long time in New York State, which will then be the balance, right, between Mamdani and that. Maybe you may have Jack Ciattarelli, who's running for governor in New Jersey, who's a Republican. He may win because of Mamdani in New York City because people don't want New Jersey to become where New York City is going. So you kind of have these balances. And if you believe in America, if you believe in the American political system, the way the systems are set up, people don't even understand how fractionalized it is. Here in Israel, you have one police department. Right? You go to the corner, that same police is a federal police officer. You don't use that term, but it is. It's a national police officer. Right. Where we live in Bal Harbour, where I was mayor, we had our own police department, our own city council, our own laws. Then there's the county. Here you guys call it a moatza, right? So we have the county with its own police and its own government, and then the state, and then all of that is set up for a reason, right? And that's to disallow those things to happen that you're seeing happening in Latin America. The electoral college system doesn't allow those kind of leaders to rise to power so easily. And I still am a big believer in America, and I was born there. It was a country that gave my family the most opportunity they've ever had in the history of my family, who traveled the world like most Jewish families. And I'm still a proud American, and I always will be.
Amazing. Wow. Well, that is definitely very positive. And you've also highlighted the importance of peace through strength, both military and morally. So what does that principle then mean for the U.S. leadership today? How can you apply that to what you just said?
Yeah, we cannot live in a place or we can't, let me retract that. We can't have a policy in the United States that we retract from the rest of the world. There's a big discussion in the conservative side. Like, what does America first mean? Right? America first doesn't mean America alone, right? What happens here in the Middle East impacts what happens in Israel. What happens in Canada in the United States. What happens in Canada impacts what happens in the United States. We have to lead. If we do retract, if we become isolationists, which is not the trend, by the way, that there is noise on the side on becoming isolationists in conservative circles. If we were to go there, we'd also have to be okay with not leading the world in economically, militarily, in morally, on all these different issues that are so critical to what it is to be an American. So it's very important. I think deterrence is critical. Military deterrence is critical. We saw the opposite of that under President Trump, who moved around assets that should have made, for example, Hezbollah shake in their boots and go back under the rocks they were hiding under. But it didn't, because they didn't believe he can use them, right? Even though he said don't, and he tried to make these threats. When you don't have the ability to deter bad actors through military strength, then you don't have peace. You invite, it's an incentive for war. So you need strength to disincentivize war from all the world's bad actors.
Do you think that that means Iran is shaking in its boots now after those bombers and that we're not going to see a resurgence of Iran, or do you think that it'll take a lot more time?
I think Iran is very interesting. I think to understand Iran, the rebuilding of Iran's facilities and military, which they're trying to do now, you have to understand the war between Russia and Ukraine and the war between Russia, the economic and political war, let's say, between the United States and Russia. Because that's what's happening is Russia and China are trying to strengthen Iran as a way to stick it to the United States, to strengthen that side of the political ledger. It's the same thing that's happening in Turkey. If you look at the demands that the United States made of Turkey, if they want aircraft from the United States, which I'm against, by the way, but they say, well, we'll sell it to you if you don't buy it from Russia, right? That helps you. It helps explain. They're on both sides. The United States is trying to pull them to our side of the ledger, and that's what's happening in Iran. Are they shaking their boots? I don't know. I think they're embarrassed by what happened, but they control their own narrative there, right? It's not that there's free press there or free discussions. I'm sure in Iran, the narrative is that the attacks failed and Iran is doing amazing and everybody's doing great, right? But people are smarter than that and they understand that. I think without support, I know that without Chinese and Russian support, Iran falls. But unfortunately, that's not the world we're living in.
Yeah, wow, it's so fascinating. So let's talk a little bit about the role of social media and media. So social media has really gotten out of control. I mean, do you think that the train sort of left the station and all of this anti-Semitism and all of the things that we're seeing are partially a result of what has happened there and we can't really pull back? And I think I would ask, if you don't mind, the same question with Western media, which is, Trump was very interesting when the peace agreement was announced, and he said, we're even happy with how the media covered it, the mainstream media this time, they did a good job, because he's been saying about the fake news over and over again. But the truth of the matter is it's very hard to know what truth is anymore, and that social media and that mainstream media have really overlapped in a lot of ways, and you're starting to see commentary that's portrayed as news, and, people that aren't in the news acting like news people on social media, and it's a whole vicious cycle. So what do we do about this?
So just from a Jewish perspective, since we're sitting here in Israel, I could tell you that immediately when you ask this question, start thinking of how the Nazis controlled the media before the Holocaust. And if you go to the Jewish Museum in Warsaw, they do a great job kind of going through the narrative, how they started shifting the narrative to start brainwashing their people. Why? There were only a few media stations, newspapers at the time, right? So they can feed and dictate to the people what it is they are going to hear and what they're going to listen to. It was like that in the U.S., not obviously for purposes of genocide, but it was like that in the U.S. where there were only a few stations for many years, and everyone said, "Oh, it was a great time." Walter Cronkite and these guys would get on the news every night and tell you what was happening, and the world was great. We all knew the negative part of that, which is they told you what they wanted to tell you and didn't tell you what they didn't want to tell you.
Maybe we all live very happy lives.
Maybe. I think we have, as humans, we have a tendency of always looking back at the history, with this with glowy eyes.
Right.
But we thought most of us thought when social media came around and when it developed to what it was developing into, we said, "Oh my God, this is incredible! This is a free exchange of ideas. The best ideas are going to win. This is a town square amplified, and a town square is like study any sort of philosophy of culture of town square is like necessary. Where you're going to stand in the town square on a soapbox and share, and the best ideas win. This social media is that on steroids. Unfortunately, the algorithms that are attached to it, right, that incentivize crazy talk, right, and conspiracies is one big problem. The second problem is if you were sitting alone in your bedroom and you said, "I hate Jews," right, but you had no one to talk to about that. Yeah. Okay, most of the time, I was going to say 9 times out of 10, but many times less than that, or more than that, the vast majority of times, that's it. You're going to go home and say, "Okay, I guess I have this feeling. Nobody else has this feeling." These days, you can go online and find peers that think the same things. Go on and look for flat Earth discussion topics on or threads on Reddit. You're going to find them. You're going to find help, and you're going to find people that are going to keep instigating you to go out and act. So I think that's the danger of social media. I don't think it exacerbated anti-Semitism, but I do think it helped set it on a course of action, sort of to take them out of their dark bedrooms, out into reality. We see that time after time with people who go out and commit acts of terror. Or the lone wolves in particular, they were home. They had some desperate theories, and they had a fan club for those theories, and they kept encouraging them to go out and do something. So that's a real problem with social media. Is the cat out of the bag? I think it's going to continue to evolve. Free speech is still going to win in the United States, at least. In Europe is another story. But I think there is going to be a continued evolution. We're seeing traditional media finally understand how to use social media to get their messages out. We saw Barry Weiss now is going to take over CBS News.
It's huge.
Right, those are big changes, and she's not going to be the last. Right, there's going to be a lot of those coming. So we're going to see a lot on the traditional media. I think it's very interesting. And traditional media, which ties to what I just said with Barry Weiss, it has realized that the position that they've taken in the United States now, which has been really to be a voice for the Democratic Party, for the left, is not working. Even CNN, you have Abby Phillips' show now where she's having discussions all the time with Republicans. Imagine that, having discussions, and that show's doing tremendously well, right? So people are seeing, at the end of the day, it's business for those folks. If they can make money having a balanced show, they'll do it. I think we're going to start seeing a shift, but I think media is always going to be a problem. I'm not as optimistic with media. Traditional media is going in the wrong direction. Can it be saved? Who knows?
Well, what about faith? I want to jump to that, kind of tying this in, because you're a religious person. You're very faithful, and the religion's really gone through, kind of everything that you do in different capacities. And you've sort of painted a picture in this last half hour that's really looked at very optimistic on the one hand, but a lot of problems that are going on in the world. So when you look at the faith that you have and your belief that, in the higher power, how do you feel that factors into all of this? Do you believe that there's some plan that maybe we just don't quite understand yet? Where do we go from here?
Yeah, so it's a difficult question as far as whether there's a plan or not. Of course, everyone who believes in God believes God has some sort of plan, and we don't have a good understanding of it, and we just have to believe and pray and do all the right things. That's true, and I believe all of those things. That's not really what drives me, because if that were what drives me, to say there's a plan, then I'm not going to. It doesn't.
You wouldn't have to do anything, I
action.
guess, right?
Exactly. So first of all, being Jewish is just who I am. I get asked often, usually by younger audiences, like, "What was it like to speak about anti-Semitism as a mayor, or in this place or in that place?" I'm like, it's just who I am. I'm just standing up for my people. You wouldn't ask that of a black man speaking about racism in his community. Yeah, I don't. You've never heard a black activist being asked, "Why are you standing up for the black community?"
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
But you get asked that as a Jewish activist all the time. I don't consider myself an activist, but I'm someone who's active in these things, always pushing on different items. It's just who I am as a person. What does it mean? I think that. Let's tie it back to your first questions about October 7th.
Yeah.
Okay? I've been someone that's always been very connected to Israel and to Judaism, to my community, to our religion. It's very important to me on all aspects and everything I do, from being a parent to just being a person, being a husband. But I think after October 7th in particular, all Jews, not just on the left, but everywhere, have realized that those who are going to protect us, the only ones we can rely on, is ourselves.
Yeah.
We also realize that there's not a lot of us out there, and the divide that we have makes us even smaller. So we really have, it's really, if you really break it apart, you can maybe be at 2 million, 3 million worldwide of really people who support the state of Israel and the Jewish community, maybe a little bit higher, okay? But they're in pockets. We are in pockets everywhere. So it makes it all the more important to dig our heels in, to make sure. It's a post I made the other day. I was in Hebron the other day for Sukkot. Okay,
nice.
Which is an incredible experience. I don't know why there's not drones flying up there and they're being, for the whole state of Israel and Jewish world to see what that looks like, right? To shake the lulav and etrog during Chol Hamoed and Sukkot, right outside of the cave of the patriarchs. And the first thing I thought is the only way to make a tree go stronger is to dig its roots deeper, right? And that's what I think of all the time when we're facing all of these challenges as a people. So we have to dig our roots deeper. When you look at the problems of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiment, unfortunately, you'll always see Jews in the mix there as well. And why is it? It's because they're lost. They've never tasted real Judaism. They've never understood really what it means to be a Jew. No one showed them before, right? It's a failure of a previous generation. So you can take one of two paths. One, you can write them off. I refuse to do that. I refuse to write off anyone from our own community ever, right? They can have the worst opinions. I'm going to engage with them. Not just engage with them, I'll then invite them to my house for dinner, right? I want them to understand what it is. Because what you have with those people that are out there, not just committing terror acts, but also protesting and working against their own people, right? Are people that are lost and they're looking for purpose, and they don't realize that they didn't just fall as a flower from the sky, right? They come from a tree with 3,000-year deep old roots, and that's who they are as a people, and that's something that drives me. And I believe that that's a message that will resonate. It resonates, by the way, in the Christian community in the United States today as well. And the Jewish community needs to be a part of that, so we can bring back these people. We can strengthen our numbers, continue to ride now these next 20 to 30 years of success and be a part of it. We now, as Jews around the world, have the obligation to be part of the rebuilding of the State of Israel that started on October 8th, 2023, but now is going to go into overdrive.
Wow, amazing. Well, Gabe Groisman, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing all of these insights.
Thank you for having me. It was great.